subjective. I don't know if it's the correct term.
I don't know either. We are now streaming, just letting you know. So if you
Well,
want to, if you want to get the fuck out, now would be the time. It's lovely always having you, my friend Roger. Roger's out. Like, fuck this, I'm gone. Which, who can blame him? Who wants to be here for this? Nobody. Okay. Today I'm going to share my PDF and we will begin streaming. Good Lord. This is going to be interesting. So, the last few weeks, I've spent probably an inordinate or unhealthy amount of time going over the term axiomatic. The goal has been pretty simple. I feel like I have a very, very poor understanding of the axiomatic. To say it very simply, I just have a very poor understanding of the axiomatic. That has changed a bit. I wouldn't say I have a great grasp of it, but I think we've been going through a lot of really good math shit, a lot of really great essays from some very, very bright people. Thank you, Daniel Smith. And we're going to be making our way back into the axiomatic at this point by going back to Anti-Oedipus and seeing how we can make sense of it at this point. And we're going to be starting from bottom of 244. Yes, no.
Is the bot on, Brooks? Sorry, just to make sure it's recorded.
It's recording on YouTube, so
okay.
Yeah, I stream direct. I don't do the secondary recording. So we are safe and we are there. We'll be starting from the bottom of 244. And I'll just say, as I always open up with, thank you for joining us today at the Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus. We are in our third run-through, slowly but surely making our way through our third run-through. Good Lord. That it's been going on this long is still kind of stunning to me and wonderful. But we're making our way through 3.10, the capitalist, what is the actual section titled? A great question, Brooks. Brain's not working very well. Capitalist representation. Capitalist representation works in a very different way than the prior systems, as we've been sort of talking through. The biggest reason that we're making a large switch is that capital, because of the nature of how it deterritorializes, because of the nature of how it breaks things down into their, you might say, tiniest bits, to the parts of signification rather than signification itself, rather than the coding that comes socially from a social group or overcoding that comes from a despot. Our system is that of all of these tiny bits that have fungibility in the way it signifies. The examples they use, and I'll do the same as they make their way into Yelmslev, is the way meaning and representation operates is similar to the pixels on, they talk about a television, I'm going to talk about a computer screen. The computer screen doesn't have, every pixel doesn't have a meaning. This is the pixel that means love. This is the pixel that means this. They're not just a single color, but they make any color, and any color that can be part of larger shapes or larger meaning. This setup inside of capital is very interesting. It means, for example, tiny dots, tiny meaning, tiny letters. Everything doesn't really have a meaning itself. It only exists as part of this larger hyper-contextualized contingent thing because it has been broken down into these pieces. So when we see it, it's transitory. There's this oddness to it. Now with that partiality of everything, those pixels and all that stuff, as this decoding happens, as we realize it, as it becomes just part and parcel of how we exist, the deterritorialized flux of everything happens within capitalist production as well. This is not just tied to only representation. Representation is what conditions everything. Everything. And everything, I mean production of subjectivity, production of the unconscious, production of the social order, production of blah, 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 blah. So when we talk about all of these bits, one of the things alongside those pixels that we were talking about is we see capital. capital works very much the same as those pixels. This is why they were using the example within art of all the little pieces, because when we talk about the dollar isn't commodities. Commodities is very, very old school. That's the way it was during the despot, during, kind of anything else before capital. And a commodity or a thing would exist. It would have its own sort of meaning and setup and value based on its contingent social production, or because the king said so. Here is a king's doubloon. It's a bit better than the doubloons you'll get from the other guys. Mine's worth more. Mine's more important. Mine has meaning behind it. If you're part of a tribe that has no currency system, as we would call capital, they may have multiple layers of what we might call non-capital currency or symbolic things they can trade. The example they give is of a tribe that has kind of this really odd system of commodities being the lowest function of the economy. And then they have like these honorariums, these staves that are given or earned. And then they have the highest level of purchases. You could say they're not vanity items, but sort of the most expensive, the high value is wives, slaves, land, oxen. You can trade the staves for those upper things, but not for the lower. The lower, you can actually break staves apart and sell parts of them, the wires and everything. This setup is not the same as what capital does. This maintains meaning. This maintains value across stuff, and it keeps sort of a social order to meaning. We do not have that. Instead, capital functions by being the smallest parts. Like the pixels on a TV, no dollar is Steve's particular labor or skill in how he did X. It's not that fan. Even if you go to the dollar store and you exchange $1 for a bag of really cheap balloons that your 6-year-old can't blow up because they tear all the time, fuck the dollar store. You do that, those balloons aren't then all that dollar. The dollar has fungibility, and this fungibility, this base layer thing, does a weird trick on us, because it starts all of the things that we do in our society and it ends them. But because of that and being the start and the end, it allows this continuous process. Marx talked about this. This is new translation of Capital's out. It's even in there. We have the sort of way that traditional things happen. You start with a commodity, maybe you exchange it for money, you get another commodity with that money, and you make those trades. It ends with commodity, begins with commodity. You kind of have a closed loop relationship with commodities and value. With money, I start with money because I have $100. I've been paid $100 for my job. I then go out and I buy $100 worth of shit. Ultimately the goal is to use that to get more money, so I can buy more things, so I can get more money, so I can buy more things. There's no loop value. The capital itself doesn't have value. So how do we maintain and have value in our society? How do we value anything? How does it not just simply collapse under its own weight? Well, this, my friends, this is how the axiomatic works and helps us develop this. This is how the unconscious is structured inside of capital. And this is the section we're at. We're at 244. Please follow along. If you're not, you should be. You should be able to see it pretty cleanly on screen. But off we go. Civilization is defined by the decoding and the deterritorialization of flux in capitalist production. Any method will do for ensuring this universal decoding. The privatization brought to bear on property, goods, means of production, but also on the organs of private man himself. The abstraction of monetary quantities, but also the abstraction of the quantity of labor. The limitless nature of the relationship between capital and labor capacity, between the flux of financing and the flux of incomes or means of payment. The scientific and technical form assumed by flux of code themselves. The formation of floating configurations starting from lines and points without a discernible identity. The route taken by the decoded flux is traced by recent monetary history. The role of the dollar, short-term migrating capital, floating of currencies, the new means of financing and credit, the special drawing rights, the new form of crises and speculations. Our societies exhibit a marked taste for all codes, codes foreign or exotic, but this taste is destructive and morbid. Well, decoding doubtless means understanding and translating a code. It also means destroying the code as such, assigning it an archaic, folkloric, or residual function, which makes of psychoanalysis and ethnology two disciplines highly regarded in our modern societies. Yet it would be a serious error to consider the capitalist flux and the schizophrenic flux as identical, under the general theme of a decoding of the flux of desire. Their affinity is great. To be sure. Everywhere capitalism sets in motion schizoflux that animate our arts and our sciences, just as they congeal into the production of our own sick, the schizophrenic. We have seen the relationship of schizophrenia to capitalism went far beyond problems of modes of living, environment, ideology, and that it should be examined at the deepest level of one and the same economy, one and the same process. Our society produces schizos the same way it produces Prel shampoo or Ford cars, the only difference being that the schizos are not saleable. How then does one explain the fact that capitalist production is constantly arresting the schizophrenic process, transforming the subject of the process into a confined clinical entity as though it saw in this process the image of its own death coming from within? Why does it make the schizophrenic into a sick person, not only nominally, but in reality? Why does it confine its madmen and madwomen instead of seeing in them its own heroes and heroines, its own fulfillment? And where it can no longer recognize the figure of simple illness, why does it keep its artists and even its scientists under such close surveillance, as though they risked unleashing flux that would be dangerous for capitalist production and charged with the revolutionary potential, so long as these flux are not co-opted or absorbed by the laws of the market? Why does it form in turn a gigantic machine for social repression, psychic repression, aimed at what nevertheless constitutes its own reality, the decoded flux? Let's talk of an easy process here. The Western demand for exotic code. This is a thing that I mean, there's a lot of examples, but I'm going to go with one that I know has happened on the server before, or you see in deleuze studies actually quite a lot. People get really into the Dogons. Dogons are a minor group in Africa. I want to say Mali area. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I'm not positive. And it's an indigenous group to the area. Now, they have really extraordinary beliefs of how the world sort of started and the way that they were first started, of this egg and the twins and this blah, 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 all these really, really incredible things, really cool stories. And part of what they do is they build bronze statues of these things. Now, in the West, we commonly use the phrase we fetishize the exotic, we fetishize non-white culture, we fetishize overseas culture, all those things. But it's a starving for codes. And the way the process works, and they talk about it here pretty cleanly, and I think we can talk about it pretty easily too. When the codes enter, and we see one, we see a really cool Dogon statue of an egg or of the twins. The first thing that kind of goes through the process before Brooks can buy one, I can't just, I'm not a Dogon, I don't just go there. How much is it worth? What's it worth? Because it's translating the code of all of the different parts of it. When was it made? Was it made by a shaman of the tribe, or was it made by some guy on the side? That would change how you would view it, but change how I'd view it. It's made by just some dude who's like not even Dogon. He like showed up and like is just making stuff nearby, and he's calling himself that. That's fucked up. I want it from a real Dogon shaman. I want to break these codes down, and I want to create value where that happens. That's the process that I just outlined. Sounds weird, but follow it. When I say, no, I want it to be from a real shaman. I want it to be from the tribe. How old is it? Was it made by them before they were contacted or afterwards? All of these things are sort of the coded meaning of the thing, that when it came from, what it means to the people, whose ancestors did this. Oh my God, the ancestors of this person. That's incredible. That probably makes it worth more. Like, this mentality is the morbid, that's just the morbid and destructive taste of codes. This is what happens. Well, decoding doubtless means understanding and translating a code. On the other side of it, it also means destroying it as such, assigning it an archaic, folkloric, or residual function. That's what I'm doing. Oh, this person. Oh, it's related to this. Oh my God, that's so cool. It's probably worth more that way. This happens, by the way. This is not just, I shit on Deleuzian studies because it's more self-effacing than anything. But this is a thing that we all do. When I was 9, my parents took me for the first time to Four Corners. I grew up in Colorado. And if you haven't been to Four Corners, basically it's a lot of Native American stands, it was at the time, selling like tchotchkes. I don't know how else to put it. Just lots of jewelry, sort of. Kokopelli statues, like really, really, it was really weird shit. One of the sadder, odd experiences for me. But it was that thing. Oh, this was made by our shaman. This was made by this. This is from this age. This is this setup. We do this with not just these items from tribes, but we do this from places all over the world. Oh, for example, Chinese tattoos, or in China they get English tattoos. It's a real thing. The exotic side of things, the coded nature of it that isn't quite made value, suddenly made value. This is part of the capitalist system. And it means, specifically, it's decoding. It is understanding and translating a code to capital. This destroys it, ultimately. It makes it have a function inside of capital that's particular. It's archaic. It's this, it's that, it's this. Here's the value. Here's the setup. Here's who did it. All the different parts of quantifying it as much as we can. That setup does the thing. I bought a dragon egg salt because my wife got it as a gift for me. It's the oldest way of making salt that there is in Southeast Asia. There's only one guy who does it. It's this whole thing. But the process is, because of, to me, I think it's this incredible, archaic, old way of doing it. That's it. I've assigned it that thing, and we've the rest of it has been done. It's been translated to value. It's been moved into that position. So that thing that happens, what we don't want to do is think that it is the same thing that happens as we spent the whole book talking about the way the schizophrenic decodes, the way the schiz process operates. It's very close. It is absolutely very close. How capital breaks all of these things down into their, tiniest dollar amounts, these quantified little tiny bits or pixels or tiniest meanings. The schiz does this. The schizophrenic process is about these tiniest parts. If we go all the way back, it's the connections of partial objects is the base. And it seems like they're the same. And a lot of people, Nick Land, a lot of people make this fucking huge mistake to say, oh, well, that's the same thing. Because this is what capitalism does, this is what schizophrenia does. And this comes from a double error. The first error, and they sort of outline that because they say we have seen the relationship of schizophrenia to capitalism is far beyond modes of living, environment, and ideology. It needs to be examined at the deepest level of one and the same economy, one and the same production process. We should not be talking about, oh, there's this and this. It's no, we produce people as much as we produce cars, as much as we produce everything. Everything is produced. And the production of society is creating the schizophrenic. These things are there. This setup is there. But why is this happening? How is this different? And they are. We'll be getting to it. But how do we consider that? How do we think through that? And how do we deal with that setup of our society produces people that we put at this time into asylums, that we section off? There are real stories of people being locked in basements or locked in their room. Still happens today, by the way. Because they are untenable and not able to be dealt with. And remember, schizophrenic in this sense, as they're using it, we use schizo in sort of common parlance to mean people who are sort of having multiple personalities or who jump from one thing to another randomly, like the so random person. This is autism also, by the way. Like, this includes a whole bunch of stuff. Schizophrenia was a very large class at the time of issues in mental non-normativity. And when we look at, even today, we have an outburst of schizophrenia. We have an outburst of, that's what they would say, an outburst of autism at levels, varying levels. We've had it for decades and decades and decades. This isn't today. This is like the last 100 years. The setup of autism that is being produced. And when we say autism, we mean the spectrum. There's a lot. There's layers. Everything's produced at different levels, but they are produced. They're produced by our society, as they say, the same way it produces Prel or Ford cars. The difference is that we can't sell schizos. They're kind of, shit, look at this. Oh, what am I going to do with this kid? Parents say that. That setup that exists, why is this the way it is? How does this work? My sounds bad, Winston? My sound bad? Sorry. Sound on YouTube's bad. What the fuck? I'm terrible. You can only hear me in the left ear. What the fuck? Apologies, one moment. There. That should be double now on YouTube. You should be fine. I was only in the left ear. I've been fucking with my setup. I've got a whole thing I'm doing, but it's fine. I mean, look, I was just taking, as someone says, I was just taking leftist audio to a new level. That's making a commentary on production of leftist audio. All right. I'll remember to double that up. So this process happens. It's not like we're not aware that people are produced by it. Capitalism is producing, but why is it producing things that are unsaleable? Why is it making things that are like this? Why is it making people like this? Why is it making psyches like this? How does one explain the fact that capitalist production is constantly arresting the schizophrenic process, transforming the subject of the process into a confined clinical entity? And again, remember, late 60s, 100%, that's what they did with people who had even moderate autism, let alone severe or complete catatonia. This flat out clinical, as though it saw in the process the image of its own death coming from within. Why does it make the schizophrenic into a sick person? This phrasing is important, and I've had it every time we've gone through it. I think even this last time, it's like, wait, what does that mean? But why capital as a production system doesn't really choose things, but why is the schizophrenic not lauded? Why? It's socially produced humans, therefore the response to them also is socially produced. By the way, that's kind of how it runs. So if things are socially produced, like this autistic, confined, locked up asylum person, why did that become the case? Why does it produce them as sick? Because the system at large can produce them as well, as heroes, as oracles, you might say, as gods, as touched by this or that, or angels. Like there's a million ways in the past that people have been sort of dealt with when they're mentally non-normative. That doesn't mean that they just need to be confined and hidden away, which is what we do with the autistic people today, with schizophrenic people today. Why does it do this? As though they risked unleashing flux that would be dangerous for capitalist production and charged with revolutionary potential, so long as these flux are not co-opted or absorbed by the laws of the market. This setup, why is this the case? The answer is the next paragraph, and I'm going to jump to it, but I want to just take a second and be like, hey, is everyone following? Are you all good? Is everyone with me on this? You got it? Just say no and something, and I'll answer. We'll spend a little bit of time. Say yes if you want, and we'll keep charging ahead. And Roger's still here. Roger, if you feel like I'm wrong at any point, you just tell me. You not interrupting is like a good sign for me. Oh, and for those who may be wondering why I say flux instead of flows, it's because of I have issues with the translation. Coulé is the word for flux, for flow. Flux is the word for flux, and they don't use the word coulé here. Coulé, I believe. So just getting that out of the way. It seems everyone's following so far, because we're about to get to the axiomatic. So as we make our way into this, the thing to pay attention to is all the parts of things that before were coded or overcoded, the coding, the social coding of things, the generated social meaning or done by edict from the king meaning of things. These all get broken down, and they get broken down into very particular ways, all the way from the crown jewels in Tower of London or wherever the fuck they are this week. The meaning of them has shifted drastically. Generation on generation, the original coded or overcoded meaning of what those things mean goes away, and the value of them becomes what people are able to focus on. The you could say cynical value, the broken bits of quantity, all the way down to the tiniest parts. We have that decoding, deterritorialization happening, and then wrapping it back up in something else. Well, what's that thing? Holy fuck, we got to get to that thing. It's axiomatic. That setup. What are we doing here? Well, the answer to all of this, as we have seen, capitalism is indeed the limit of all societies, insofar as it brings about the decoding of the flux that the other social formations coded and overcoded. But it is the relative limit of every society. It affects relative breaks because it substitutes for the codes an extremely rigorous axiomatic that maintains the energy of the flux in a bound state on the body of capital as a socius that is deterritorialized, but also a socius that is even more pitiless than any other. Phryne, on the contrary, is indeed the absolute limit that causes the flux to travel in a free state on a desocialized body without organs. Hence, one can say that schizophrenia is the exterior limit of capitalism itself, or the conclusion of its deepest tendency, but that capitalism only functions on condition that it inhibit this tendency, or that it push back or displace this limit by substituting for its own immanent relative limits, which it continually reproduces on a widened scale. It axiomatizes with one hand what it decodes with the other. Such is the way one must reinterpret the Marxist law of the counteracting tendency, with the result that schizophrenia pervades the entire capitalist field from one end to the other. But for capitalism, it is a question of binding the schizophrenic charges and energies into a world axiomatic that always opposes the revolutionary potential of decoded flux with new interior limits. It is impossible in such a regime to distinguish, even in two phases, between decoding and the axiomatization that comes to replace the vanished codes. The flux are decoded and axiomatized by capitalism at the same time. Hence, schizophrenia is not the identity of capitalism, but on the contrary, it's difference, it's divergence, it's death. Monetary flux are perfectly schizophrenic realities, but they exist and function only within the eminent axiomatic that exorcises, repels this reality. The language of a banker, a general, a industrialist, a middle or high-level manager, a government minister is a perfectly schizophrenic language, but that functions only statistically within the flattening axiomatic of connections that put it in service of the capitalist order. The highest level of linguistics as science, Yomslev is able to effect a vast decoding of language only by setting in motion, from the start, an axiomatic machine based on the supposed finite number of figures considered. Then, what becomes of the truly schizophrenic language? truly decoded and unbound flux that manage to break through the wall or absolute limit, the capitalist axiomatic is so rich that one more axiom is added. For the books of a great writer whose lexical, stylistic characteristics can always be computed by means of an electronic machine, or for the discourse of madmen that can always be heard within the framework of a hospital, administrative, and psychiatric axiomatic. This is, by the way, that's fucking AI. We'll get back to that. I've got a rant there. In brief, the notion of breaks flux has seemed to us to define both capitalism and schizophrenia, but not in the same way. They are not at all the same thing, depending on whether the decodings are caught up in an axiomatic or not, on whether one remains at the level of the large aggregates functioning statistically, or crosses the barrier that separates them from the unbound molecular positions, on whether the flux of desire reach this absolute limit or are content to displace a relative imminent limit that will reconstitute itself further along, on whether controlling reterritorializations are added to the processes of deterritorialization, and on whether money burns or bursts into flames. That's great. Okay. This is going to be a fun one, right? This is going to be a fun one. No, maybe a little bit. I think a little bit. The setup here, and we're moving in because they've again, they've made the point in the previous thing talking about how all of these pieces sort of are breaking apart, how we're finding, and they've been talking about it. First, they did it aesthetically through pixels, through the dots of things, through various artists that are breaking things down even further, so we don't even have whole shapes, or shapes at all. It's flatly like the smallest pieces of things. We very much have come to that within Capital, even in their time, but I would say even more so now in ways they probably couldn't even have considered. This setup that we're in, through the art that is produced in this way, people produced in this way, we end up with a really fascinating thing where capitalism seems to decode. So does schizophrenia. Doesn't have codes, and instead is sort of a free association is the wrong word, but is sort of an eternally connective process. They seem the same. They're not, because the way that one operates versus the other is in a very, very particular way. Very particular way. Kind of a huge, gigantic problem. Capitalism, when it decodes, and we talked about what decoding was a moment ago, when it decodes and it assigns these other values, it's doing so not just sort of lickety-split and sort of for fun. It's not just doing it because that's what it seems at the moment. It's doing it based on larger axiomatics that have been developed. So when, and this is the way the molecular unconscious operates and the production of society operates. So there's a process here. And when we say process, again, just to go back, not me saying that you are cognizant of it. This is not me saying that you go, yes, 2 for 7, not that. These are all the things we've learned our entire life. These things boiling into us, these parts of us that have produced us, that we've gotten used to, that are sort of sacrosanct, that are part of us we don't even consider. It's the unknown knowns, as Zizek might say, that are within us. The axiomatics are it's an extraordinary number of hardline rules that maintain the flux of energy in a bound state of capital as a socius that is deterritorialized, but also pitiless. Axiomatics, to speak of them in a particular way, I actually think one of my favorites I used it a couple times, I think I'm going to continue to, is when we talk about what is a woman. Well, it's one of my favorites these days. Our friend Matt Walsh did wonderful sarcasm, did that wonderful, awful documentary on it. When we talk about what is a woman or a man, or we talk about anything, there's kind of this odd way that things behave. In coding societies, in social societies, that's not really a question that can be asked because it would be silly. The reason one is in their position socially is because they have the capability to fulfill that social role. That's it. It's hardlined, it's particular, and it's, you could almost say determined, but it's determined from a very, very base level of socialization. So tribes have very, very unique sexualities and gender roles, but women can reproduce. Men can't in those societies. And they wouldn't say man or woman, though. That's not how they talk about it. You just are in that position socially. We have the after image now. As we look back, we go, oh, we call women this. That's what women who sort of share some of those characteristics with, I'm going to call it that. That setup, that signification, puts us in a really interesting relationship with that. But the reason we have this signification this way is because at an axiomatic level, the rules of society that are baked in for all of the different variant pieces that a person may be, these determine gender. These determine placement in society. Not the same as a coded or over-coded society. The king's saying all women will do this, all men will do this, which fucking happened. The rule of those things, the setup of those things came from on high. We don't have that. Instead, all of us and all things are broken down into their smallest bits. This deconstruction of things, which Marx talked about extensively and which they're getting into here, has a secondary regulation because it is, on the one side, it's decoding. It's freeing desire from these determined categories. That's fantastic. I don't need to be that position in society, whatever that position was in that specific way. I don't need to be the plus plus in Levi Strauss's fucking diagrams. I can be a minus. I can do this. I can do anything. But then at the same time, capitalism has this axiomatic, and the axiomatic layers in, and it layers in a lot more complexity because it's dealing with all of the bits of what that position in society meant, or what you are, or how you relate to gender. All of those bits become axiomatized. An axiom, just to sort of talk for a moment on what we've studied. And by the way, I know Arachne and others who've been joining me. At any point, if I'm off, you fucking tell me, because this is the interesting stuff for me. I want to make sure I'm getting it at least somewhat right. The way that we sort of think of things when we talk about the axiomatic is the example given by Daniel Smith that I like is we can talk about geometry in the way that we talk about axiomatics. The axiomatic version of geometry, which would be Euclidean, would be saying that a triangle is three angles that measure ultimately up to 180 degrees that are connected at 3 points with 3 lines. It's defining all of the bits of the thing in the order they have to be a triangle. But there's other ways to define a triangle, a lot of them actually. You could say it's when you draw 3 lines this way, or a circle. A circle is a point with an infinite number of points surrounding it at an equivalent distance. That defines a circle axiomatically. Or a circle is when I have a string tied to a pen and another tied to a pencil, and I draw as far as I can. Draw a line equidistant from that. There's a difference. It seems like it's nitpicky, but it's an incredibly important one. One is the problem of what is a triangle? How do I make a triangle? How do I become a triangle? How do I make a triangle happen? Versus what is a triangle? This gives me potential, things to play with, stuff to do. Oh, what if I did this? No, this is a triangle. This is a circle, is the axiomatized side. It is the hardlining of all of the bits of what a thing is that encase it and surround it. And that phrasing is the one I'm going to use. The encasing and surrounding of a thing that desire fills, because it's like, oh, fuck, triangle. And it's like, yes, but that is it. You are that thing. You are set in that way. This is the setup, because we have a really interesting sort of back and forth that happens with desire here. The phrasing that they have it. One second, right? Yeah, it's kind of where I was anyway. So one can say schizophrenia is the exterior limit of capitalism itself, or the conclusion of its deepest tendency. Its deepest tendency being the complete obliteration of connective meaning and the breaking down of everything into its tiniest parts. That's the exterior limit is schizophrenia. That's what schizophrenia is. It's the total breakdown of meaning as a thing. But that capitalism only functions on condition that it inhibits this tendency. It stops this total breakdown, or that it pushes back or displaces it by substituting immanent relative limits, which it continually reproduces on a widened scale. It axiomatizes on one hand what it decodes with the other. So the meaning of triangles, or the meaning of anything that gets broken down into its tiniest bits, handles very differently once it's become axiomatized. When it is axiomatized, it moves in a completely different way. It handles desire in a completely different way. The way it sets itself up is to effectively say, I'm going to have desire aim towards this and then repress it and hold it back and codify it and hold it in that position. This setup is the reinterpreting of the Marxist law of the counteracting tendency. I want to make sure I get the language on that right, because this is a fun one. I think this, real quick. Any questions so far while I'm grabbing this little bit out of another PDF? Let's see, in the section. Oh, this is going to be so long. This is going to be so much. I might just skip it. I don't want to get fucking rabbit holed. We're only an hour in and I want to get. We'll keep moving because I want to stick within desire. And yes, Quat, get everything you know about triangles. And talk about how you make triangles, not about what triangles are. The difference. And we'll get into that, but it's kind of a big deal. The result that schizophrenia pervades the entire capitalist field from one end to the other. Schizophrenia being the decoding destruction of things, the breaking down into their tiniest bits and the reassociating of them. This is schizophrenia. But for capitalism, it is a question of binding schizophrenic charges and energies into a world axiomatic that always opposes the revolutionary potential of decoded flux with new interior limits. This setup that's happening in the world, the building of the new, the construction of it, whether scientific, artistic, philosophical, whatever it may be, academic, and they'll talk about that in a second, all these things that may produce the new and have the capacity to produce the new. It has to be careful. Capitalism's got to basically go, oh, no, we can't use this for emancipation, even if the new would allow such a thing, would push in that direction. Instead, we have to continually pull back. It has to be continually pulled back. And instead, this internal limit that capitalism finds a way to insert, this axiomatic of what things are, how things are, and that's it. It's almost a dead end of revolutionary desire, but it's a place to go. Oh my God. It may free us. It can free us from labor. It can free us from work. It could free us from X. It can free us from this neuroses, this other thing. Great. No, wait. We want to have that thrust towards it, but then we want to capture it in this world axiomatic, the way things are, the continually evolving way things are. And somehow the feeling with that this is the way things always have been, despite not at all it ever being the fucking case. And I'll get to what I mean by that in a second. It is impossible in such regime to distinguish, even in two phases, decoding and the axiomatization that comes to replace the vanished codes. The flux are decoded and axiomatized at the same time. This is why my example that I gave of the sort of looking back on the Dogon items, or I mean really anything, but the example of the Dogon or the cool dragon egg salt that I bought, the setup for these, we can talk about it, but it happens instantly. It happens at the same time. It's not one and the other, even though that is process, but they're imminent to each other. We have on the one side, we have the decoding of the flux, whatever it may be, and also the axiomatization, the creation of axioms to trap desire, to trap the thrust of passions or things behind it within a very particularized configuration. And that setup puts us in the position. Hence, schizophrenia is not the identity of capitalism. Not. But on contrary, its difference, its divergence, and its death. Schizophrenia without axiomatization would, I mean, again, there's a reason we put people like this away. They don't connect. There is no social production. There's no longer anything happening. It's the death of capital. By the way, this doesn't mean the death of capital in a good way. This is just the end of capital, the way our social is produced. Not necessarily a good thing, by the way. Important. Monetary flux themselves, the way that dollars pass around. And if you've ever watched, you should go watch old videos. And I know you kids may not have seen it. I was lucky enough to go to the floor of the stock exchange in New York when I was very young. And there's a few scenes. Ferris Bueller's Day Off has one. There's a bunch of movies that sort of show it off. There's old footage of it, and it's one of the craziest fucking things to watch. It seems, I think I even said at the time, like, this is insane, and it is. And I mean that quite at this point. I mean it along the lines. It's schizophrenic. People yelling at each other, doing hand signals, throwing paper back and forth. It seems entirely nonsensical from the outside. Well, because it kind of is. It's not meant for the outside. This is not the setup, but instead, this is perfectly schizophrenic reality. But it exists and functions only within the immanent axiomatic that exercises and repels this reality. These are all the things happening again at the same time. There's immanent to each other. There's the setup, and it's why there's this schizophrenic energy, the connective, productive energy that's also captured and not able to go further. In a lot of things, this is not. We've experienced it. A lot of us have experienced this. This is not some weird thing, but it's the setup that they're talking about is simple. To say it again, monetary flux are perfectly schizophrenic, but they exist and function only within the immanent axiomatic that exercises and repels this reality. So the schizophrenic reality is repelled by the axiomatic immanence, the immanent axiomatic that surrounds it. This happens at once. This is why they have the phrase, the language of a banker, a generalist, an industrialist, a middle or high-level manager, a government minister, is perfectly schizophrenic language. It's all schizophrenic language. This is not like, they're not like unique and have like a non-schizophrenic language. That's not the setup here. The thing is, the reason it works the way it does is that it functions only statistically within the flattening axiomatic of connections that puts it in the service of the capitalist order. So the order of the capitalist order, and a very particular use here, which I really like, this is all of the little bits of language through the banker, and they're still bits, still quite schizophrenic, still completely out there, become axiomatized and placed, and then now they're in capitalist order. This thrust and this setup is constant. So there's no, as they've done throughout this, they want to get away from the idea that, oh, it's the schizophrenics are free. Oh, it's the proletariat. They're the ones who have the, no. All the language is the same in this way. The language used is all made of these pieces. They use Yelmslev as the example of this. All of the tiny pieces that we're using to communicate. I'm doing it here through pixels. I'm doing it here through voice and signals that are being sent that can be broken down and are being broken down into literal ones and zeros that can be read and placed in different ways. I'll be getting to that point in a second. All these things are at their base perfectly schizophrenic, but they are formed and shaped and trapped by the axiomatic of the reality of capital that we're living in. The everything then is then put in service of the capitalist order. This is the setup they're talking about here. Drew says this decoding axiomatizing happens at the same time because of the nature of the axiomatic. Because because of the nature of the axiomatic would be, the because is where I'm going to get stuck, I think. That because it's not because of the axiomatic. The axiomatics don't really do things. They don't really cause things. Axiomatics are placed in position. The creation of the axiomatics and the placement of them just works directly on desire to trap it. The axiomatics of what is work, money, when, where, how, etc. All of those things that sort of are taking desire and trapping it. These things are created at large, axiomatically, socially. I would almost say that the reason it happens, if there's a cause, it would be the nuclear family and how we are raised and how we're put in those positions and what the nuclear family even means as we go. But so we'll come back to that, Drew. I want to keep going. It's a really particular use here that I want to talk about. The capitalist axiomatic is so rich, one more axiom is added. For the books of a great writer whose lexical and stylistic characteristics can always be computed by means of an electronic machine. Let's talk about that one for a second. AI systems, as they exist, only exist by breaking down the current everything, media-wise. Let's talk about books, for example, or art. It doesn't read a book. AI doesn't read books. It doesn't know what a book is. It actually doesn't even know how or why words relate to each other. Just that they are near each other based on a handful of bits of math. So the hyper quantification of books or writing enables us to do a really weird thing. That really weird thing is a book can statistically create in the style of another writer through AI a similar bit of writing. Good or not is, I think, not really the point here. The way the capitalist axiomatic functions is almost at its clearest in the way that machine learning AI, which is not real AI, functions. All of it is about breaking things down into its most axiomatized bits. Image generating systems don't generate images. Instead, they look at an image, what it is in terms of the specific configuration of pixels, at its most basic level, stripping away any fucking meaning at all. It strips away any fucking meaning at all. And it doesn't even actually grasp that image. Instead, what it does is they actually add noise to it, random dots of color all over it, and they do this a handful of times until it's gone. And they count how many times it takes to do it until the image is gone. And that thing they do to a bunch of images of the same thing. Not that the AI has chosen, but that people have said are the same thing. This is like the most cynical way to look at art that has ever existed. And it's kind of amazing. It's kind of its own real way. It's kind of brilliant. I mean, I'm not going to like say it's not fucking smart. It's kind of an amazing process if you go through and you read it. I think it's pretty amazing. But it's not art. It's not emergent. It's not coming from a position of oh, I want to paint X. It's instead saying, paint me something that is this. It is the Euclidean painting system. It is the axiomatized drawing system or writing system. And so when we talk about the books of a great writer whose lexical and stylistic characteristics can always be computed by means of an electronic machine, this is the capitalist axiomatic at its most prevalent and most cynical and most visible to everyone. Now, take that, the way that AI is doing this shit, the way that AI functions in this shit, but it's not aware of words, it's aware of the placement of them, like what they are, sort of all the different pieces of them, right? It's all the different things. But it's not aware of like what the word the means or even AI. Now take that and realize this is all of desire being trapped in the same way. And you're doing it. You're doing it. We're all doing it. Some of us more than others, some of us less than others, based on a whole fucking slew of stuff. We're all doing it. This is the pieces being turned into and becoming through the axiomatic hardline configurations. The discourse of madmen that can always be heard within the framework of a hospital, administrative and psychiatric axiomatic. The The line here is actually not about Mad Men. They're not saying, listen to Mad Men. No, it's the discourse of Mad Men that can be heard within the framework of a hospital administrative and psychiatric axiomatic. The way that people who run those institutions speak of it and put people in that, how the conditioning that they create for themselves of their conversations, how they talk about their patients, how they talk about the illnesses, how they talk about the things around them. These things that they're doing create the space that they then place other people in. It just happens to be set up in a way, again, it's this axiomatizing process. In brief, the notion of the Brake's flux, the brake flux is, I mean, it's everything. Machines only work when they break down. Desiring machine, desire, they break, and then there's like expulsion of desire. Has seemed to us to define both capitalism and schizophrenia, but not in the same way. They're not at all the same thing, depending on whether the decodings are caught up in an axiomatic or not. This is the difference. Capital, the decoding of things in capital, which is constantly happening, and its axiomatization instantly is capital. This is the function of capital. This is what capital does. Turns it into very instantaneous, complex meanings that are what they are. They are what they are. And they're changing, by the way. That shit changes all the time. And it also means that it's very contingent and very unique and not really determined in the same way. Not determined at all. It's not the same as like asking, what is a woman? We don't really have that anymore. That's not really a thing we can go through. It's very, very, very different overall. But schizophrenia wouldn't, that's not even a thing. What is a woman? That's not, they don't fucking whatever. The schizophrenic, the autistic, this doesn't exist to them. They don't give a fuck about this stuff. They would happily use it as a tool as they make their way through whatever existence they've got, because they don't care about it in the same way. They don't have the attachment to the larger system or story, the axiomatizing setup that creates these cold structures that they're not able to deal with. It's one of the reasons that they break in the world of D&G, and Guattari writes drastically about this, quite a bit actually. So does Deleuze, by the way. It's clinical and critical. Good shit. Decodings are on whether one remains at the level of large aggregates functioning statistically or crosses the barrier that separates them from the unbound molecular positions. These are the two regimes, and they're very clear about how they operate. They are not the same thing. Capital is happening at that larger regime, the molar regime, the large aggregates that function statistically. Or crosses the barrier that separates them from the unbound molecular positions, the molecular unconscious. These two different ways. The molecular axiomatizing doesn't happen in the same way. It can't really. It doesn't work. At large, this is what a triangle is, because at large we statistically know we've mathematically figured it out. LJS, autistic don't care about it but still use it. The way that they talk about the setup is, think of it as when someone, mental hospital, for example, let's talk about a traditional schizophrenic that kind of works today. If they say they are Jesus Christ, they are not a pretender to the throne. That's not really what they're doing. Instead, their existence, their intensities, the processing of desire they're going through is basically being consumed by them, and they're looking for whatever they can grasp that would give voice to that makes that something they're able to communicate. So they're saying, I am Jesus Christ, the same way one might say, I am hungry or I'm in pain. They're feeling that and then speaking that. The setup is
I understand this example, but when you said the autistic don't care about it, I think it's like saying someone want to do something and then they don't care about the tool they use to do it. It sounds really strange, because I had some similar conversation with other autistic and non-autistic people about this very similar topic. But it's more of like they care about it in a completely opposite or completely different way. But I don't know if you are understand it correctly if you say they don't care about it at all. They just want to use it to do something, or to give voice, or to give text to something that is not verbal. But yeah, it just sounds really strange to me for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, as I was, it would be applied that I was speaking very specifically, care about it in the same way that what we might call a normie does, or that we sort of talk about as the normative position. That's more what I mean. That the normative position of the normative position that we see when we talk about the axiomatized flow, where we have, oh, this is the very particular structure that desire will fit in. It happens in a very different way. And so probably was speaking a little bit capriciously and quickly when I said they don't care about it. They don't operate in the same way. They don't deal with the axiomatic elements in the same way. To them, actually, the ones I've spoken with, it tends to be much more from almost the problematic point of view, where instead it's, well, what does this mean? How does it work? I need to be able to use it, and trying to figure it out from that position.
Just a little bit more on what you mean by problematic, please.
So for Deleuze, the axiomatic basically sits in opposition to the problematic. An axiomatic, for example, would be
wait. Did he actually explicitly put them into the opposite on the spectrum?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And
okay. So the setup is a problematic doesn't mean that it's a problem in like, oh, that's a problematic child, but like instead it's a problematic in the way that I have a problem I need to solve, and so I'm going to. So the problematic is the sort of understanding of, here is how I solve a problem. How do I draw a circle? Oh, I've got these pieces and I do it. He uses Spinoza.
I think I know exactly what you mean now. Yeah, I think I know what you exactly mean. Because I think I get the impression of the opposite single spectrum thing, but I think they're carrying a lot of assumptions about these axiomatic and how it divides neuronormative and non-normative people. I think there's a lot of assumptions there, and then they don't really put it into explicit words.
Well, more, how to put it? And this is where we start getting into things that I'm just gonna be upfront. They don't necessarily outright say. Guattari goes into it a bit, but there's a lot of nuance in this that I'm probably not gonna be able to communicate correctly. So I just want to upfront say I'm working my way through this, because this is the stuff also I find really fascinating. The setup when we talk of the sort of way they're talking about it is that the axiomatized desire, the very hardline structure of X, Y, and Z, when actual schizophrenia, when the schizophrenic process is confronted with it, it basically, we could say, bounces off or doesn't quite know how to deal with it. It stays if a schizophrenic process stays the schizophrenic, because it doesn't understand, like, connecting to the idea of a thing. It gets triangle. I see a triangle, but it doesn't regard it as this eternal, absolute, like, Platonic ideal of a thing, or this axiomatized truth of this is a triangle, this is a man, this is a woman, this is the person who works.
I think I understand what you're saying. But does this paragraph specifically try to basically reveal, oh, when does it stay schizophrenic and when does it not stay schizophrenic?
This chapter
is it trying
does.
to say that? What?
The section does, not this paragraph.
Okay, sure.
Because they're going to be getting there. It's because they'll be getting into it. They kind of say it in this paragraph.
Okay, yeah, that's enough question from me now. I think it got a little bit more.
No, and it's language I need to work on. It's a fair question, and I'm kind of speaking quickly because it's fucking. There's so much here, and I have spent time just to be. I have a couple of friends who run some autistic organizations and non-normative organizations who I've like annoyed about a lot of this. Who really they enjoy it. They get a kick out of it. Because I can
definitely see that. I can definitely see some autistic people will have huge problem with this, but I can also understand why. I can understand what the author is trying to say.
Yeah, and it's again the bigger push that they're really making overall is that the mental states that people are in, the position is produced by society. And that line of they're made by Prell, made just like Prell or Ford cars, so are we. Like everyone is produced by society, but the difference is that my position is saleable by capital as labor. I'm able to do that, but these people, they can't do labor in the same way. They don't really connect with things that way. Why would capitalism make them? How does this set up and why is this built this way is a big deal to them. Because again, Guattari spent his entire life working at the time, the asylum system, trying to make it not only more humane, but also work in a far, far better positive way. And so it's a really, it's actually really, he has a handful of really good soft subversions from Guattari, has a handful of really fantastic sort of essays on very much what you're talking about if you want to dive in a little bit more. Sadly, in this, overall, they're not really going to dive, even though it is about capitalism and schizophrenia, it leans on the capitalism side versus the schizophrenia side, even though they go into the schizophrenia. They're generalizing a very massive group. It's why I always make the point, like, this isn't just schizophrenics, it's this huge group of people that even now we understand is much wider and much larger than it ever was. So like they're talking about all of that, and so it's they do kind of cut some corners. So it's fair. I need to watch my language on some of that. Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll I got to reconsider thoughts on that. It's good shit though. And someone in chat says, yeah, it's probably a better idea to problematique. It sounds like problematic in English anyway. It just sounds like I'm saying it with a French accent. It's problematique doesn't work. So I've tried. Trust me. I've looked for ways to translate that in any other way, but it just doesn't work. And it's also a thing that Deleuze only really began to write in a handful of other smaller texts, and a lot in 1,000 Plateaus. Okay, but there's a lot.
So maybe I just came up with something. Maybe the word problematic could be used as a phrase that operating under the premise of a certain question or problem, right? Like it's operating under, like on the basis of something. It's not necessarily defining it as something problematic. I don't know. Am I understanding this?
I mean, you're close. It's
Okay.
it's the reason he ended up using this word for it is in French, problématique is like it's how to put it. A teacher would give you a problématique, almost a thesis question statement, and that you have to write about. This is the word they use in academia there for that. The problématique of a thing. So when we talk about like the point being, I'm making something new and I don't really know what it is. I'm building a piece of art, for example, and I'm doing it, and the guy next to me is like guessing what it is. And he's like, is it a person? Is it a car? Is it a dog? And I want to beat the shit out of him because he's already trying to figure out what it is, and I'm making something. I don't know what it is, but I'm making something. And that difference is kind of the best way for me to phrase it. And I know you do art stuff in psycho, like you cross that line more than most. You cross over a lot of that stuff, but that's kind of the difference, is like making art and then making a bird painting. There's a difference. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I understand exactly what you're saying, because I equally do abstract and representational. And most artists that I know, they do not. And I think I can start to understand. It's very related to how the French means the word problematic. It's
Yes.
like, maybe it has to do with the earlier, the reference to an eminence, or just a reference by itself, or like other reference.
It's also a thing that's really unique to Deleuze, because his use of it, his mission, if there is like a through line, he's got a few of them, but I would say like the biggest is from the beginning, he's looking at what he will come to call the axiomatic, but it's the hard line organizational determinism that things have when we talk of them certain ways. And for him, he's like, if I can come up with a way for us to talk about something without it having that determinism, which is what he calls the problematic and
Yeah,
he's playing with.
exactly. I think so. I actually talked with the sociological professor about this, and I think she basically agree. You know, it's like there's an uncertain thing that has an otherness within itself. We can still operate on the premise of this thing without knowing exactly what it is. I think
Yes.
this is one of our previous conversations, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It certainly have to do with the premise of art, especially contemporary art at this moment. So I think that's where my understanding was coming from. Thank you.
Yeah. And so it's and so to finish this paragraph out, and then I'll get to a couple of the questions. I'll get to you, Drew. The play that's happening here is that we have everything is being broken down into the tiniest bits, but also at the same time that this is happening, the decoding is happening. All the little codelets, you might say, all the little bits, they're being at the same time axiomatized. Where this is what this thing is. The organization of all of those little codelets is now considered cynically. And this is the move that happens in capitalism. Instead of the code existing, it's now code to decoded to codelets at the same time organized into a particular setup. So that way you end up with, to speak of the Dogons again, if you go on Etsy, you can find a lot of Dogon doors, which is one of their big things. But they all kind of sort of are the same door, and they're not really filled with the same awe or shock that you might be seeing otherwise. It's because now the Dogon, oh fuck, we can make money doing this. We're now part of the capitalist system. We do this. And so they're repeating those doors. They're building those things. They're not, and I'm not saying you should buy this, but they're not imbued with the same coded meaning. Instead, all the parts are there. All the pieces are in the right place because that's where they should be. And codelets does sound terrible when I say it out loud. But it's like the best way I could phrase it. All the broken little partial objects. And, oh, Drew didn't actually have a, Drew, this decoding axiomatization happened at the same time because of the nature of the axiomat. We already went over that. Yeah, easy enough. So next paragraph is where we get further into the axiomatic. And again, be thinking of that process of the codelets. I'm going to say codelets because I kind of like that. It's the cynical quantification of the code turned into organization. And it happens, whoop, whoop, done. We know the thing, we know the setup, and that thing. But that configuration of it, the setup of it, the organization of it, these things, the reproduction of it, it can go. But why not merely say that capitalism replaces one code with another, that it carries into effect a new type of coding? Two reasons, one of which represents a kind of moral impossibility, the other a logical impossibility. All of the cruelties and terrors meet in the pre-capitalist formations. Some fragments of the signifying chain are struck by secrecy, secret societies, or initiation groups. There's never anything in these societies that is, strictly speaking, unavowable. It is with the thing that the capitalism that the unavowable begins. There is not a single economic or financial operation that, assuming it is translated in terms of a code, would not lay bare its own unavowable nature. That is, its own intrinsic perversion or essential cynicism. The age of bad conscience is also the age of pure cynicism. But in point of fact, it is impossible to code such operations. First place, a code determines the respective qualities of the flux passing through the socius. For example, free circuits of consumer goods, prestige goods, and women and children. The characteristic object of codes is therefore to establish necessarily indirect relations among these qualified and therefore incommensurable codes. Such relations indeed imply a quantitative siphoning off of portions of the different sorts of flux, but these quantities do not enter into equivalences that would presuppose an unlimited something. They simply form composites that are themselves qualitative, essentially mobile and limited, where the differences between the elements compensate the disequilibrium, whence the relationship of prestige and consumption in the block of finite debt. Go back through. It's a lot said here. It's fucking a lot said here, isn't there? All right. We'll talk about the moral impossibility, because I think it's the easier one to go through, and it's one I think that we can speak to pretty simply. Codes, generally speaking, lay bare all the parts of what they are. They are, when we speak of the tattoo, the gourd tattoo that's on the woman and how it changes, it lays bare the relations that that woman, her womb, and the people around her have to each other, even in the moment of talking about it or looking at it. The way that relationships exist is open, not like an open relationship, but like they're visible. They're part of the communicative process. The relations and network relations are just there. This is part and parcel of not just Strauss, but Godelier's work on Strauss. And it extends across to all of these prehistorical tribes. It's an extraordinary thing. Things are visible. This was true also, by the way, with kings. You may say, oh, kings had secrets. It's like, well, yeah, they don't mean that like the world knows everything that's happening. That's not what they mean by visible. Just that everything of a thing that you're looking at is bare. It's laid bare. It is what it is. And the code that is doing that is there. But capitalism, we don't have that. The phone I have doesn't contain or show all of the different parts of what made it, what went into it, how it works, and its social relations that produced it. That setup isn't the same thing. Instead, it's literally distributed all of the tiniest parts from all of these horrifyingly abused parts of the southern world, of impoverished countries, of mining countries, places that I don't even, it's not that I don't want to know, I have a fucking phone. It's a phone. It's a fucking iPhone. I use my iPhone. I may be aware of other bits of it, but it doesn't lay bare its realities to me. No one does. No, people don't. They're who they are, who they're related to. When I look at someone, you can't tell who's wealthy, who's connected, who's poor, who's this, who's that, who's a congressman, who's like, you have no idea. People don't have that. We don't have that. Codes don't exist like that. There is the unavowable, the unspeakable, and it's the perversion of the system built into it, sure, but it is just completely unspoken, unavowable, and the reality of it being so deeply cynical. It's not that we don't want to deal with it, it's that it just doesn't scream that at us. Oh, you're so cynical. It's not the setup. It just doesn't have it. It's just purely a cynical sort of interaction. And on top of it, that interaction that would be this complex in the setup, it couldn't be coded. Like, we can't code in the same way that code works, even if we created one. So it's not just a moral sort of thing. We don't code this because it would reveal all these unavowable, awful things, but also you can't. Like, as they say, in the first place, a code determines respective qualities of the flux passing through the socius. So, for example, the flux of desire that's related to the thing you're looking at. It's a woman with a gourd. Yeah, there you go. It's a woman, fertile, relation to this, related to that, blah, blah. It's all of the parts of desire that are attaching, that are sort of dealing with that, from the way I'm seeing it, location, and the network sort of realities. That thing, totally codable. This wouldn't be that, though, because it doesn't, as he says, the characteristic object of code is to establish necessarily indirect relations among these qualified and therefore incommensurable codes. Such relations indeed imply a quantitative siphoning off of portions of the different sorts of flows. This is the effectively the recording process, the little bits of all of these things. These quantities do not enter into equivalences that would presuppose and limit something. They form composites that are themselves qualitative, mobile, and limited. The relationship someone has with a thing that is part of what gets spent and what gets transferred. The mobile blocks of infinite debt that are the mobile blocks of debt that sort of make their way in these societies. This can't be included in the code in the same way at every level, in the way it's working within capital. This doesn't happen. Can't. So we have two reasons why we can't just replace one code with another, why we can't move from coding to decoding to supracoding, or coding to overcoding to mega coding or meta coding, whatever the fuck would come next. Instead, necessarily, because we have from on high overwriting the codes that were emergent from survival, being overcodes. Now it's the destruction of that, the decoding of those things. What do they actually mean? What does it mean to be a blacksmith? What does it mean to be a guy who does this? Well, what if I broke that apart into 2 or 3 jobs? What if I broke that apart into 2 or 3 machines and I had Steve run all those machines for me? That setup that capitalism encourages doesn't operate just in production. It's every part of it, all of the parts of it. That's why they continue, and I'm going to continue. All of these code characteristics, indirect, qualitative, limited. Indirect code is inference code. Qualitative is non-quantitative. It's the qualities of the thing that sort of are built in. And limited, which we don't have because money goes on forever, are sufficient to show that code is not and can never be economic. Contrary, it expresses the apparent objective movement according to which the economic forces or productive connections are attributed to an extra economic instance as though they emanated from it. I'm going to say that one more time. That's probably one of the better. I'll continue the sentence too. On the contrary, it expresses the apparent objective movement according to which the economic forces or productive connections are attributed to an extra economic instance as though they emanated from it, an instance that serves as a support and an agent of inscription. That is what Althusser and Balabar show so well, how juridical and political relations are determined as dominant. Case of feudalism, for example, because surplus labor as a form of surplus value constitutes a flux that is qualitatively and temporally distinct from that of labor. I'm sorry, it's going to be doing, because I'm always fascinated whenever they actually use the word flux. It makes, fuck, is it actually going to be? Yeah, the P. Hope I'm still sharing the right. Love when this happens. Seconds, I'm trying to parse French. Really, is because there's nowhere that fucking Althusser and next to each other. Okay. C'est bien. Comment ça? I'm very frustrated. This is going to be every time. I just don't understand how things get translated the way that they do in time. So flux is translated as flux. Great. But it's translated, the rest of the sentence I'm not sure I'm a super fan of. Labor must there. That's okay. Close. Fuck it. It's fine. 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 I'll just move the fuck on. This is what Althusser and Balibar show so well. How juridical and political relations are determined as dominant. Case of feudalism, for example, because surplus labor as a form of surplus value constitutes a flux that is qualitatively and temporally distinct from that of labor, consequently must enter into a composite that is itself qualitative and implies non-economic factors. Or the way that autochthonous relations of alliance and filiation are determined as dominant in the so-called primitive societies, where the economic forces and flows are inscribed on the full body of the earth and are attributed to it. In short, there is a code where a full body, as an instance of anti-production, falls back on the economy that it appropriates. That is why the sign of desire, as an economic sign that consists in producing and breaking flux, is accompanied by a sign of necessarily extra economic power, although its causes and effects lie within the economy. For example, the sign of alliance in relation to the power of the creditor, or what amounts to the same thing. Surplus value here is determined as a surplus value of code. Hence, the code relation is not only indirect, qualitative, and limited. Because of these very characteristics, it is also extra economic, and by virtue of this fact, engineers the couplings between qualified flux. Consequently, it implies a system of collective appraisal and evaluation, and a set of organs of perception, or, more precisely, of belief, as a condition for the existence and survival of the society in question. Thus, the collective investment of organs that causes men to be directly coded, and the appraising I, as we have analyzed it in the primitive system. It should be noted that these general traits characterizing a code are rediscovered precisely in what today is called genetic code, not because it depends on an effect of a signifier, but on the contrary, because the chain it constitutes is only signifying in a secondary way, insofar as it calls into play couplings between qualified flux, interactions that are exclusively indirect, qualitative composites that are essentially limited, and organs of perception and extra chemical factors select and appropriate the cellular connections. That last little bit is actually really fantastic. The use of code, as they're talking about it here, and bring it back to genetic code. This kind of comes whether or not you actually have a grasp of what genetic code does. We are not built by genetic code. That's not what it does. It isn't a little construction worker that's like building us. Some people feel about it that way. Fine. Instead, code sort of it's not telling. Again, this is like the language Dawkins uses. DNA and genetic code is the instruction set for other proteins to operate and build, dependent on environment and other things. Susan Oyama basically writes a phenomenal book that really makes this point large. But instead of going that deep, instead we can be talking about and pulling back to their very point. The reality is the genetic code itself doesn't depend on a signifier. There is no, the genetic code, it's referring to, like, I don't even know what that would mean at this point. The code of genetic code is referring to this other stuff. No, there's nothing there in that way. Instead, the code is doing what the code does, and it is the thing that is being referred to. The chain it constitutes is only signifying in a secondary way. It calls into play couplings between other proteins, interactions exclusively indirect, qualitative composites that are essentially limited, organs of perception, extra chemical factors that select and appropriate cellular connections. When they say code, that's what they're talking about, is that type of interaction. Now to go back to the beginning of this, all of these code characteristics, indirect, qualitative, limited, are sufficient to show that a code is not and can never be economic. It expresses the apparent objective movement according to which economic forces and productive connections are attributed to an extra economic instance as though they emanated from it, an instance that serves as a support and agent of inscription. The code itself is not actually the economic thing. When we talk about this, and it's tough to do, especially today, when we talk about, for example, the stabs of the river Tig. It's the river Tig, and the tribe that's there, they have these stabs. We talk about them as though and we talk about them cynically. I mean, even I did. I say like, oh, look, they've got these stabs and you can trade them, like 5 stabs for like a woman here on the upper side, but you can't use stabs for this cheaper shit, which is commodity. That is just pure barter system. Although you can sort of take the stabs apart and break them down. I'm talking about it very cynically. This is not really what sets up. Instead, all of these codes aren't the economic system themselves. Dollars are. Capital is our economic system. It is economic. But we don't have it in the same way with codes. Instead, they're always referring to some other thing. This is why they have the socius as part of this, the socius of the earth that falls back and takes it, that is the agent of inscription, this larger story that's being told of your place within the tribe based on political, social, and other sort of histories. This is the sort of larger setup. Otherwise, it would be flattened. Everyone would be, oh, I'm a woman from this family. This family part is kind of the big fucking deal in these tribes. Oh, I was born into this family, kind of a big deal to kings, for example. There's a larger thing that falls back on. And when they use the term falls back on, it's because it's particular. It's not at the start, it's at the end of the process and falls back on. So think of how to do this. My son built a Lego tower, and it was really interesting because he built like the floor first, then he built one wall. And I made a comment, and the wall is being supported by the floor. It is. And he talked about it that way, that it was built for the wall, and the wall came after. The wall came after. He didn't know he was building the wall. The wall came after. When these tribes are doing the trading, they're doing things kind of for and because of the earth, but that came later. These things came later. These things are further downstream, yet they fall back on. They fall back on production. And that's the big deal, that an instance that serves to support economic forces of productive connections are attributed to an extra economic instance as though they emanated from it. An instance that serves as a support and an agent of inscription. The agent of inscription is the big deal, the writing into the world of here is this thing, here is this being traded, this being set up, this is being recorded, this is being known. We remember this, we'll deal with it, we'll make more, we'll do more, et cetera, et cetera. That fun stuff. These things are the sort of play as they set up. This is the so yeah. Do that. To continue. I'm not going to go into Althusser and Balabar. You can read them, but it's very clean. How juridical and political relations are determined as dominant because surplus labor as a surplus value constitutes a flux that is qualitatively and temporally distinct from that of labor. Consequently, must enter into a composite that is itself qualitative and implies non-economic factors. Surplus labor. Surplus labor is surplus profit, effectively. Surplus labor is a form of surplus value, constitutes a flux, and very particular, that is qualitatively and temporarily distinct from that of labor. Consequently, must enter into a composite that is itself qualitative and implies non-economic factors. Surplus labor itself necessarily exists in this really weird way. This is the sort of excess of code, especially in the way that the earth socius or the feudal system, non-feudal, despotic system, excess labor has its own qualities. If you build too many things for your tribe or you build too much, there's a reason we went through this. Bataille goes through this. The accursed share, the nature of sort of overproduction as a thing. There's no way to sort of compensate for that except to have excess, except to have that extra, to continually have more and more and more. You can't have that. It would just build up forever. But that setup itself implies that there is non-economic factors at play here, because there is nothing to compensate it. There is no sort of reason it was done. There's no payment that was traded. It's just extra shit was being made. Non-economic element is at play there. This is sort of Althusser and Balabar use this to talk about how the juridical or monarchical relations were dominant because it would produce extra, because people would build extra. There's something more than just economy at play there. That's the big deal. Or the way that autochthonous relations of alliance and filiation set in stone, beginning sort of baseline, the foundational people of a tribe. The autochthonous relations of alliance and filiation are determined as dominant in primitive societies, where economic forces and flux are inscribed on the earth and attributed to it. My family has had this land for years, meaning something different now than it did then. We've been on this land for forever. Mother Earth gave it to us, or this God gave it to us. We've been here. The literally writing in the earth by taking a plow and dragging into the earth, or how you built, or how you wore down paths, literally writing into the earth. It's not a figurative thing. It's literally writing into the earth as a setup. In short, there is a code where a full body, as an instance of anti-production, falls back on the economy it appropriates. This, again, falling back, falls back, the earth falls back, the king falls back, the juridical political relations are dominant. It falls back and says, you're going to build a bunch of extras. It's not economic. This is not an economic thing. This is some other shit that is saying make more. That is why, as a sign of desire, as an economic sign that consists in producing and breaking flux, is accompanied by a sign of necessarily extra economic power. Although its causes and effects lie within the economy. For example, the sign of alliance in relation to the power of a creditor, of more the capitalist side. Or what amounts to the same thing, surplus value here is determined as a surplus value of code. And this is, the code relation is not only indirect, quantitative, and limited. Because of these characteristics, it is necessarily extra economic. By virtue of this fact, engineers the coupling between qualified flux. This is the last bits, or you could say the throes of what we've got. We didn't move into capital in a way that has zero codes, that has zero power, that has anything left from the kingly, despotic, or earthly. We are a separate time. No, we're not. Everything's transitory, everything's a transition period. And there's some other power dynamics that are happening here at play that are odd, that are doing this extra thing, this extra economic thing that engineers these couplings, that places these, that sets them up. And yes, Dublo, spot on. Autochthony is about the axiomaticity. God damn, that's a fucking good one. The setup that's happening here is we have these foundational connections and placement of things, the autochthonous, original placement of setup. Now, this odd thing that's happening within the axiomatastic, great word, or the axiomatization, there's another thing happening beyond just this economic, things are worth $1, quantified, everything. There's still power, there's still extra power, there's still excess everything happening. There's something more going on here. There is still a socius at play. This is this sort of larger thing that's happening. And consequently, it implies a system of collective appraisal and evaluation, a set of organs of perception or belief as condition of existence and survival of a society at question. This odd play that's happening, there is this, we all agree this is what the thing is worth. This is what is going to happen. This is the setup. Why? Because we don't, but we do. We totally do, but we don't, but we do. I mean, we all go about our lives and we don't break into crying fits every single few minutes. Some people do. but we go about our days. How do we get to this point, this collective system? Well, this is here. This is part of the things that are left over. Again, we're constantly in a transitory period, constantly moving into one. There's things that are left over. And these things that are playing is, as he says, there is a collective investment of organs that causes men to be directly coded, phrasing I as we have analyzed it in the primitive system. These parts are still here. The power structure of the king and the despot, there's still some power within the political that's causing this sort of excess to be done, that's causing an excess to fall back on and appropriate the sort of production that's happening at every level. But there's also this odd thing happening of the collective investment of organs, which allows men to be directly coded. By coded, they mean like DNA, built from the ground up according to those elements, according to axioms that are building us in a very particular direction, setting us in a very particular direction, and causing desire to be organized in a very particular way. Adrian says in the YouTube, codes like family or tribe also reveal affordances, political interactions. Its utterance is an attempt to establish or define a situation. 100% that this is the nature of these things is it's when we talk about codes of that time or the overcoding of a despot, there's very particular interactions that are happening that we still have pieces of today that's trying to build or define a situation based on sort of overarching or things that have fallen back on production, but not on the problematized, but on the axiomatized. We're moving into that, but I am this family and this thing and this thing, and it means obviously to everyone this thing. We don't really have that anymore, but we do. We totally do that shit. Instead of, oh, I'm part of this family. What is that? What could that mean? This is what it does mean. The axiomatizing versus the problematique. And so as we move into this and we keep talking about capital, this is the deal, as they say. So many reasons for defining capitalism by social axiomatic that stands opposed to codes in every respect. This is why they're making the move away from codifying our relations and instead moving us very specifically to a different way of thinking about how our unconscious is structured and also how the social order is produced. Produced in form by the axiomatique, by capital, in a very particular way that we invest our organs directly that are inscribed upon the next paragraph I'll get to. It's going to be the TIV. There's the TIV. I said TIG. God damn it. Do it every time. Because we're going to be talking about it, but we'll get there. I'm going to get to the next paragraph unless someone has, it's a solid paragraph. Unless someone has a comment or anything, feel free to jump in. Keep drinking. Throat's getting dry. It's a lot of talk. And Drew's typing some. The coded systems, I always recommend Godelier, and probably the best on it is going to be the Metamorphosis of Kinship. Verso publishes it. If reading into these societies, the way codification works and social relation works in prehistorical societies, to the overcoding of things within the despotic, and then to capital, the Metamorphosis of Kinship is a revisiting of a Strauss, who he studied under, and Godelier does amazing work. So easy recommendation. Fucking wonderful book. Genuinely wonderful. So if that's your thing, consider that your, go dive, go find it. It's everywhere. You need it, Z Library, LibGen, or whatever. Never mind, Drew, you typed so much and then it's only 2 letters. That's okay. Then I'll continue. Because apparently everyone's understanding what I'm saying. And you're all completely on board, which is great. And I'm taking screenshots, and I will remember that all of you completely agree with me and think I'm right and don't disagree or misunderstand anything. So many reasons for defining capitalism by social axiomatic that stands opposed to codes in every respect. First of all, money, as a general equivalent, represents an abstract quantity that is indifferent to the qualified nature of flux. But the equivalence itself points to the position of a relation without limitation. In the formula MCM, Marx, read Marx, the circulation of money as capital has therefore no limits. MCM, remember, it starts with money, ends with money, means we can keep going. There's no, because money doesn't do shit. It's not like a commodity. If it started with a commodity, I made something, traded it for some sort of currency, and then I trade it for another commodity that I need, consuming it. There's boop, there you go. That's the interaction. We don't have that interaction anymore. We start with money to buy commodities, generally speaking, to sell, to do shit with, to build something else so we can get more money. Workers aren't. We get fucked. That's the way it works. But the capitalist, MCM, we get fucked because we get paid, we buy something, and then we're done because we get fucked. But capitalist, MCM, circulation is completely different. The studies of Bohannon concerning the Tiv of the Niger River, or those of Salisbury concerning the Xian of New Guinea, have shown how the introduction of money as an equivalent, which makes it possible to begin and end with money, therefore never to end at all, is enough to disturb circuits of qualified flux, to decompose the finite blocks of debt, to destroy the very basis of codes. I'm going to pause there because it is really interesting what they saw. The TIV have these really intricate stabs made out of wire, and it's really kind of amazing. And you could trade them for expensive stuff, but not for cheap stuff. And you could sort of, there were people who like would take them apart, and then you'd have like, instead of one staff, you'd have like 50 wires. You could trade and sell as like really, really frowned upon. Here comes money. And that was it. Everything was on a level playing field. You could trade money for oxen. You could trade oxen for money. And that same money you could then trade for commodities, which you could then trade for money, which you could buy slaves with. Completely obliterated their economic system. Like completely fucked them in every single way. It's really kind of crazy. One sec. Score dodge. It's really an incredible thing. It's worth the Tiv of Niger. Really amazing. Continue. We have seen that this becoming concrete, because that's the line. Is sorry. Destroy. Secondly, the fact remains that money is an unlimited abstract quantity, cannot be divorced from a becoming concrete, without which it would not become capital and would not appropriate production. I'm just going to break through each one of these. Oh my God, Gab. Holy fuck. Well, we're going to have a lot of memberships. Aren't you just kind? Very kind. Very kind. They're ridiculous. One Dova, I understand some of the things in class are either boring or how they said it was incomprehensible. Yes, that's probably fair. It's a lot. Start at the beginning. Head all the way to AO 1.1 or join the server. We will find a way to explain everything. It's what we do. Jesus. Gabe, I love you. But this one, the fact remains that money as an unlimited abstract quantity cannot be divorced from a becoming concrete, without which it would not become capital and would not appropriate production. This is actually really important. With the number of stabs, or the way stabs would be traded in the TIV, for example, this is the reason it's not currency and capital as we talk about it. But also, this is why all currency isn't what we talk about it. When we say like, oh, the merchants in old had gold pieces. No, it doesn't work that way. A gold piece is a gold piece. It doesn't allow it to become an abstract quantity. You can't just have that. There's a type of debt there that they played with for a while, but never really made it in the same way we've got now, where we really have money as this ridiculous abstract quantity. But to have that, we also need it to become concrete, which means we need to know the value of everything constantly in terms of some singular currency. We tend to use the dollar globally as the setup, the way it kind of goes. That thing that we do, but that isn't necessarily the way it has to be, just we have to have one value, one thing to sort of go with. So this is this becoming concrete. We've seen this becoming concrete appeared in the differential relation, but it must be borne in mind the differential relation is not an indirect relation between qualified or coded flux. It is a direct relation between decoded flux whose respective qualities have no existence prior to the differential relation itself. The differential of labor and labor cost, constant cost. How much does it cost to buy materials and things like that? There's set costs. There's a differential rate that shifts, the differential, the rate of change of that thing. Then you move to the secondary bit as a thing. The secondary bit is how many people does it cost and what does it cost for me to get people to do that? But not what is the actual cost of that? What is the differential of that cost? Very important in capital. No one gives a fuck about what things cost. They care about what it costs in relation to what it will cost in the future for other people, what it has cost other people in the future, and then the rate of profit that are able to be generated. That's a whole fucking thing. But as they're saying here, the derivative of X, labor, derivative of Y, capital, cost, are nothing independent of their relation. Either one is a meaningless concept. Like the differentials don't matter. Together they do. Together they give us this beautiful, sexy curve that we call profit and capital and value. And as they say, determines the one as a pure quality of the flux of labor, the other as a pure quality of the flux of capital. The progression is therefore the opposite of a code. It expresses the capitalist transformation of the surplus value of code into a surplus value of flux. Whence the fundamental change in the order of powers, for if one of the flux finds itself subordinated and enslaved to the other, the reason is precisely that they are not to the same power. And they mean this explicitly in the mathematical sense. They're not to the same magnitude, x and y squared, for example, and that the relation is established between power and a given magnitude. This is something that became evident as we pursued the analysis of capital and labor at the level of a differential relation between flux of financing and flux of means of payment or income. This sounds more complicated than it is. How much money does Elon Musk make just in fucking interest of his money that he's got out there? Or how much money is he making doing X, Y, and Z? How much money is Bezos making? These are not... This is not the same discussion that we're having when it comes to what is your salary as an Amazon driver. We pretend they are. They are not the same thing. The magnitude changes. The power changes. The function of this changes when one is enslaved to the other because of that difference in magnitude. The power of labor versus the power of capital. Capital is infinitely more powerful, infinitely larger. We have I want to say $10.50 minimum wage. I think I'm in Washington. We're on the better side of things. I think we moved up to 15 actually. Great. How much does the fucking dividends pay out from Taco Bell? It's not even the same discussion. My buddy of mine got laid off from Activision, Microsoft. Sorry, they're the same company now. 700 people got laid off in a few different departments. They've done this a few times. Last year it was like a few thousand. My brother was a victim of that. They laid those people off who were making anywhere between 55 and probably 250,000 on the higher side, maybe a little bit more. It's good salaries, don't get me wrong. But then they paid out like $3 billion in stock buybacks. So fun. That's not the same. This is the differential relation between flux of financing and flux of means of payment or income. Such an extension merely signifies that capital has no industrial essence, functioning other than as merchant, financial, and commercial capital, where money would take on functions other than those deriving from its form as the equivalent. But in this way, the signs of power completely cease being what they were from the viewpoint of code. They become coefficients that are directly economic, instead of being doubles to the economic signs of desire and expressing, for their part, non-economic factors determined as dominant. That the flux of financing is raised to an entirely different power from the flux of means of payment signifies that the power has become directly economic. And yet, as regards paid labor, it is evident there is no longer any need for a code to ensure surplus labor when the latter is merely qualitatively and temporally with labor itself into one and the same simple magnitude, the condition characterized by a surplus value of. This is really, there's a lot happening here. Again, talking about the function of capital, how it operates and what it does, and how it sort of plays into these things. But when we talk about these odd, when we talk about the way capital functions, it can't just be purely this industrial excess. We like to talk about it that way. It's the easiest way. It's the way Marx talked about it. It's great. So I have a pizza parlor and I have an excess amount of profit. I use that profit to then pay someone else to do my job. I don't have to work. I've got excess paying for things and I'm able to do this. That's fine, but that's kind of just operating on the level of industrial capital itself. There's other things that start happening here. Early capitalism was this, very much, because there's still these hard codes and what excess can be used for. This is why you have capitalists of old who were very almost open about what they did and how they talked about it and how they spoke of it. They were very open about it. Like, oh yeah, no, I use this and I'm gonna exploit my workers. I don't want to pay them very much. And it was different because the excess code, the code was still playing as this got obliterated, as cash became something more, as cash became speculative, as cash became financial, merchant, or commercial. Money takes on other functions besides deriving from its form as an equivalent of labor. It moves in a different position. That, one second, I have to fix the Discord is apparently being funny today. All right, doggy. One sec, Dots. It's gonna be okay. This should be working. I don't know what happened. It do that. Oh my lord. It's making me do all my two-factor stuff. So be just 2 seconds. Let me make sure that doesn't. All right, try the invite link now. I don't know why it did that. Do we like lose our server boost? Oh, we got. Yeah, fucking. I don't know why it did that. Thank you though for letting me know. It should be working. Thanks, Adrian. Sorry about that. All right, we will continue now. So signs of power cease from being what they were from the viewpoint of a code. Instead, these signs of power become coefficients that operate directly economically, like right there, instead of being doubles to economic signs of desire as non-economic factors. There's a whole bunch of other shit happening in codes. No, now it's right there. The flux of financing is raised to an entirely different power from the flux of payment signifies power has become directly economic. Yet, as regards to paid labor, it's evident there's no longer a need for a code in order to ensure surplus labor, when the latter is merely qualitative and temporally with labor itself into one and the same magnitude. This is the surplus value of flux sort of created imminently in the process. Blow says, if one were to work a job at $70K annually, 9 to 5, Monday through Sunday, 0 expenses or rent, begin at the time of Christ's birth, by now one would still have less money than Jeff Bezos, and as many dollars as he has today, fewer than a quarter of his net. It's kind of amazing. But it's, again, does he have that money? Like, this is where it's, as we were talking about, the way capital works is it's not even the codes. Like, he's not like a tribal leader or a king, as much as we may make that joke, and there is political power he has in his own ways. But power is acting directly within the economic system. And with that, he doesn't just have like a bunch of money. We have, if I get my paycheck, it goes in my bank, I have that money. I can do stuff with it. But his is about liquidity and use and expense and dividends and coefficients. He is, as Gabe Newell said, someone asked him, and I always use this quote, someone asked him how it feels to have $1 billion, because he became a billionaire. He's the guy who created Steam, or head of the company that created Steam, I should say. And he said it's not so much that you have $1 billion, it's more that you're a filter that $1 billion is passing through. Really like as a way to talk about it, because the way money operates for Jeff Bezos is in coefficients. It's in derivatives. It's in differentials. The way his money operates is 100% in line with this theory, with the way they're talking about capital in every single way. Money doesn't work for them the same way it does for us. It's an order of magnitude and power difference. And that difference is actually the integration in the play that separates us into two very, very different things. Great. Hear that and question whether the layman has anything as well. Well, that's his own thing. Whether he has anything, I think I would say he has definitive things in the same way that Jeff Bezos would have differential things. He can say, I made $800. Jeff Bezos would not say that. He'd say, I have returns of 4%. Difference. If you ever talk to rich people, they don't talk like normal people at all. For like one guy I knew, very, very wealthy weirdo, had more money than God. All these people, ridiculous. And he found out I really liked wine. I'm a wine snob, but I'm not super into like expensive bottles. He couldn't help but start telling me about how he paid for this recovery of this this sunken boat from a monastery that had wine that was like 300 years old. And I was like, oh, wow. And I was thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, wow, he probably has it here. And he just went, and it was great because, I turned it around and I made 4x on what I paid. I'm like, what? It just was the weirdest. I was like, I want to see a bottle from this old shipwreck. That's how I'm thinking of this. Like, I'm fucking excited to see fucking this old bottle. Like, fucking, maybe taste it. That'd be crazy if he was going to offer. Like, but no, he was telling me how he was able to turn it around and make money. That capital works differently for rich people. All this shit works differently for these people. And when we talk about how it operates and how it works, that's the basis of this. These things don't function the same. There is a power differential, and they don't mean power. They mean it in both the ways, in the sense of it being a power in terms of exponential, but also power in terms of political. Please, LJ, go for it.
I just want to make this a little bit more understandable for me and maybe for some other people that, mostly when people have that level of power to rescue some 300-year-old wines, they usually work in either real estate, finance, and, some high executive in some sort of where I am as a biotech company, but it doesn't matter. So they have a industrial orientation, right? Because in some other countries I used to live in, it could be it's mostly likely that they have to do with politics, but in North America, it is really much in real estate. So I feel like maybe it's a little bit easier to understand if we go from the perspective of how these consuming and mentalization and how that have to do directly is a reflection of these derivatives, and instead of this, because I feel like this part is a little bit too, like, it's almost annoying how abstract it is. But if someone lives in the United States or North America, I feel like this is actually filling a very big hole of consumerism that usually academics don't like to talk about in the universities. So I'm wondering if there is if you have experienced this part, because there are certain things that sociology department, to avoid being kicked out of the funding pool, they have to emphasize certain things, and these are the things that they overlook. So I wonder if there is some explicit reference to whatever this part or the later part of the section is, and how the so-called consumerism like mostly works in these codes and code. I hate this word coefficient, but like the derivatives and
we'll
how
get
that.
to consumption. So so first, all you said, I think, was a very good way of putting it. So all of that, I find it fascinating because it's one of the things that I've noticed is this guy I knew, he had built a company. He started out as a software guy. He actually was an engineer at one point, 20 some fucking 5 years ago. Ended up sold his company, but by having a company, he stopped being an engineer. He became effectively a CEO, which is a finance guy. To your point, so like. It's the line is, and Dubois says it's the fire. It's finance, insurance, or real estate is kind of the three places that these people sort of exist. Spot on. And I think that the consumption of that and how they behave and how they think versus the consumption of the average consumer, they'll be getting into just general consumption or consummation, as they also will call it, the consumerism side of it. Because we're not there yet. We're not at the part of how capital is building images to create a consumer. A whole bunch of stuff is coming up on that. Right now, we're just at how the overall social system doesn't utilize coding, but instead utilizes axiomatics with this odd decoded flux that is capital, and an economic system that has power structures built into it natively because of the difference between labor and or worker and financier, for example, or capitalist and regular worker.
There's almost like a fucking Marxist undertone in this paragraph, but I'm just really surprised how the specific examples come after this part, because this part really feels like a summarization after all the examples they should have given, right? For example, I'm interested in how there are some of these more more schizoid-based environment that somehow resist this kind of uncoded flow. But in where I live right now, where for a few weeks ago, for example, there is this what was the meme says again? 6'5", blue eyes, and in finance and trust fund, and then this image is exploded all over the internet. But somehow in a few other schizoid environment I used to live in, that they're very much they're almost at the opposite side, right? Because if this paragraph is actually pretty universal, then it shouldn't be in a schizoid environment that actually work against this. But so I'm just curious about the examples.
Sort of. Remember the way that they're talking about it and the way they said that the words of the businessman, the financier, the stockbroker, these are just words that are schizoid as well. They're placed into a very particular social situation. So it's more complex than just saying they are the opposite of schizoid or they're the opposite of autistic, or it's not quite that there's a lot of.
No, I'm not necessarily doing that, but it's like they're almost hinting that this is a necessary result of this kind of schizoid environment, but I just see the opposite in some schizoid environment too. But so it keep going. So it's probably in the later examples. I don't know.
Fair enough. I will continue. I'm going to do one more paragraph, and I think I'm going to tap out for the day, because a little bit later I'm going to be doing a stream with someone, not sure who yet. Trying to get Sunday to do it, trying to get a few others. We have the vice presidential debate in America here tonight, and I think it's going to be a show myself. So, and besides, it's probably the last debate we're going to have for this entire presidential cycle. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch how things surface and what they come. All right. Hence, capital differentiates itself from any other socius or full body, inasmuch as capital itself figures as directly economic instance, falls back on production without interposing extra economic factors that would be inscribed in the form of code. With the advent of capitalism, the full body becomes truly naked, as does the worker himself, who is attached to this full body. In this sense, the anti-production apparatus ceases to be transcendent, pervades all production, becomes coextensive with it. Thirdly, as a result of these developed conditions involving the destruction of all codes within a becoming concrete, the absence of limits takes on a new meaning. This absence no longer simply designates the unlimited abstract quantity, but the effective absence or any limit or end for the differential relation where the abstract becomes something concrete. Concerning capitalism, we maintain that it both does and does not have an exterior limit. It has an exterior limit that is schizophrenia, that is, the absolute decoding of flux. But it functions only by pushing back and exercising this limit. And it also has, yet does not have, interior limits. It has interior limits under the specific conditions of capitalist production and circulation, that is, in capital itself. But it functions only by reproducing and widening these limits on an always vaster scale. The strength of capitalism indeed resides in the fact that its axiomatic is never saturated, that it is always capable of finding, that it is always capable of adding a new axiom to the previous one. Capitalism defines a field of immanence and never ceases to fully occupy this field. But this deterritorialized field finds itself determined by an axiomatic in contrast to the territorial field determined by primitive codes. Differential relations of such a nature as to be filled by surplus value and absence of exterior limits that is filled by the widening of internal limits and the effusion of anti-production within production so as to be filled by the absorption of surplus value. These constitutes the three aspects of capitalism's immanent axiomatic. And monetarization everywhere comes to fill the abyss of capitalist immanence, introducing there, as Schmidt says, quote, a deformation, a convulsion, an explosion. In word, a movement of extreme violence. The previous two sociuses, just because this is what they're speaking of here, it didn't, to say they existed above and beyond is probably the closest. Don't take it too literally. It's not the wording they use, but trying to explain it. When we talk about the earth socius, it's not within us or one with us or in our production. It's something that falls back on and takes on production, but it's not built in. Anti-production, which is sort of a repressive side of things, has a lot of sort of ways of letting off steam or by blocking here or there. These things aren't infused into production itself, though. They're experienced as blockages. They're things that stop production. They head it off. Codification, for example, or overcoding. This setup and this change that is happening as we move away from code puts us in a spot where capital, because it is both intrinsic to production, but also is the socius, it means it's intersposed. It's built into production itself. The full body of capital is naked. It's not covered in anything. It is just simply laid bare. The process itself, the worker attached to this full body and his organs invested socially. That's what they mean by attached. It's do think of it quite literally that the worker is embedded in the socius, no longer servile or underneath or anything, now attached to, invested, organs invested directly in it. Now we have this really weird thing where instead of this sort of oppression coming from other places, but instead anti-production is now no longer this transcendent element, the threat from above or the idealization of it or whatever. It's now built in, pervades production, becomes coextensive with it. And this last bit, as a result of these developed conditions involving the destruction of codes within a becoming concrete, the moment you have assigned a thing a value or has proven this value as the value has become concrete, you've eliminated any of the codes, any of the qualities at all. They may still be there in terms of words, but it's now part of the quantification of the thing. It has become concrete. You've killed the codes. The absence of limits takes on a new meaning. This absence of limits is not an unlimited abstract quantity in the way like, oh, it's a buzz, boo, wow, it's like a lot of stuff happening. No, no, no. This instead is actually the effective absence of any limit or end for the differential relation. If something is worth exactly $33, there's no upper end to value as a thing. It doesn't work the same way. It doesn't operate that way. It's not as they say, an unlimited abstract quantity, but the effective absence of any limit or end for the differential relation where the abstract becomes concrete. The differential relation, and that's kind of calculus shit. Dublo's probably going to fucking yell at me or something. He's not here. Good. But calculus is basically the math of approaching the infinite. It's basically about limits. It's about playing within limits. It's about understanding these things in a very unique, sort of teased out way. The oversimplified thing and probably not wholly correct, but I'm just going to say that. We've had this conversation a couple. The differential is meant to be talking about approaching this limit, playing towards it. But instead, there's this really interesting thing, the absence of limits here. Absence of limits within codes, the way qualitative codes play, it's no longer an unlimited abstract quantity, but the absence of any limit or end for the differential relation where the abstract becomes something concrete. It opens up this door in a massive way. Concerning capitalism, it does and does not have an exterior limit. It has an exterior limit that is schizophrenia. Again, the absolute decoding of flux, the elimination of the connective elements of things in every single way. At the most extreme version, hypercatatonia and absence of all of that. Capitalism functions only by basically pushing back and exercising that limit. And they mean this in all of the awful ways. They're being a bit colder than usual when they say it, but capitalism, by otherizing, placing, these people are sick, this is a thing, don't go there, like blah, blah. The way that the mental non-normative work need to be in asylums, need to be pushed, they need to be put over here. They go the fuck away. It's exercised, placed. This is the external limit, but it functions by pushing back and exercising it. It also has and does not have interior limits. It has interior limits under specific conditions of capitalist production and circulation in capital itself, but it functions only by reproducing and widening these limits on an always vaster scale. So there is no internal limit to capital, but there is. It is a continually reproduced, because again, remember, we're talking about the placement of those limits, axiomatizing of it, new codes being found, decoded, deterritorialized, and then suddenly axiomatized. Or new being built, new things being built, problematic coming along, needing to become axiomatized. Things constantly are being built within that could break it, but that the system is able to right around, axiomatize, and care. That's great. And then stuff from the outside, it's able to decode and turn into what it needs to. This is the outer limits of complete obliteration with the continual pushing away of the non-normative. And then inside of it, the rebuilding of the normative constantly as the internal limits are found and then destroyed, but also rebuilt as this is done. It never stops. Constant process, always happening. Strength of capitalism. And again, the wording here is the power of capitalism. What makes capitalism strong and resilient? It resides in the fact that its axiomatic is never saturated. It's never overtaken. The axiomatics of capitalism are able to take on new things, new shit happening all the time and build new ones. Always capable of adding a new axiom to the previous ones. Capitalism defines a field of eminence and never ceases to fully occupy this field. Somehow, without being saturated, it's able to wholly take it. This is the nature of really axiomatization. This deterritorialized field finds itself determined by this axiomatic, in contrast to the territorial field determinative by codes. Differential relations of such a nature as to be filled by surplus value. An absence of differential, we'll go through each one of these because they're the three things. Differential relations of such a nature as to be filled by surplus value. It's hard for me to even break that down maybe more than that. to maybe expand on that. The differential relation of labor to capital, differential of one, differential to the other. Um, are you here, Dublo? I didn't even see you. It freaks me out. How to phrase it? The differential relation of labor, the differential relation of capital, they necessarily are filled by the surplus value created imminent to the process itself. This is the production of capital producing its own surplus value within the differential relations. 1. In absence of exterior limits, that it is filled by the widening of internal limits. The external limit, the closest we get is schizophrenia. So the absence of exterior limits that is filled with the widening of internal limits. New shit being made, axiomatized, placed in capital. Capital is able to take it, pop it in. Capital is able to take it and pop it in. Always over, doing that damn thing. That's the second. And the third is the effusion of anti-production within production so as to be filled by the absorption of surplus value. Anti-production is the repression of, it's basically repressive blocks that are sort of in the way of desire. By having it now imminent to desire itself, desire fills the blocks itself that is its own repression. Kind of a super important distinction, to be perfectly frank. Really important. So this is this odd thing. These constitutes the three aspects of the imminent axiomatic. These are the three foundational processes and facts that capital operates under. Dublo says differential more or less means that two things are yes different, but in time they will become more different. Yes. Because it's again about the relation of that and the change over time. We're way out of the constant, like that idea, algebraic, anything. We're way outside of that here. And this last bit I'm going to say, and then we'll close for the day. Monetarization everywhere comes to fill the abyss of capitalist immanence, introducing there, as Schmidt says, a deformation, convulsion, and explosion. In a word, a movement of extreme violence. Monetarization comes to fill the abyss of capitalist immanence. The emptiness that is in there, that codes have been destroyed, meaning have been destroyed, all those things. Monetarization, capital, centered. That's the thing. That's the push. What is this, Rob? You sending? We went over this on stream already. I'm sorry you've been missing it. We did literally this entire paper. We did the Summers Hall, and then we also did the Daniel Smith, which is great. Also, they work very well together. And I know you didn't know. That's why I'm giving you shit, because I'm trying to bully you into showing up more often. And I'm going to be doing more axiomatic on the side as we go, because it's, again, I'm starting to see more and more why Deleuze spent as much time as he did in the philosophy of mathematics, which sort of is in a lot more of his books once you look at it. There is a fourth element here that they go into, but these are the three parts of the immanent axiomatic. There is another fourth immanent. I am reading YouTube chat. Is something wrong in YouTube chat? I was agreeing with you, Estelle. I was just agreeing with you. A couple of notes from YouTube chat. It's fair. I should read them out loud because I do that with the Discordies. Back when I was talking about how wealthy people handle things or think about it, or how they're talking about, again, the differential, the rate of profit, how they consider this is a very different mental state. And another great example I have is a friend of mine. He found he's actually a guy who used to appreciate whiskey. He's not someone who came from money, but he made very, very good money, very, very good money. And he's a whiskey guy, and he found a bottle of like 110-year-old Macallan, some crazy fucking. He found a case of it, And so what he did is he got a few friends to go in on it. They each kept a bottle, and then they sold the rest of them for like insane profits. That's how this is how people talk about these things. It's a very different setup. It's not so much that lazy people are sitting around enjoying their riches. They are. And in fact, there's like the idle rich. And so I'm not really talking about even them. They don't really understand money or talk about it. I'm talking more about like the capitalists. Capitalists is who I'm talking about. The same way I'm not talking about like my son is 6 and has no concept of money, and he sits around and enjoys his quote unquote wealth like as he's 6, whatever. If he was 50 doing the same thing, he's mentally the same thing basically. And it's a really interesting setup. Again, talking about how wealth operates, or how people produce, or how these things are regarded. We like to universalize our own experience or how we consider things. And there's parts of that that are fine to do. There's parts of it that are not. The way that people are produced and how people are built, it's important to remember that they are produced by their material conditions as well. And so as such, how do they regard or think of things? How do they consider the money in their bank account or consider cash versus how we might do it? I have a running budget. We're not, things are tough. Things are in tough times. It's the way it works. I've had good times. I've been fortunate. That setup where it's like, okay, here's our monthly nut. Here's how much costs are. Here's how long we have before this. I need to get X amount of dollars. Things like that. Different mental state, because it's not dealing with capital, dealing with money. Difference. One of the things I harped early on as they were going through this, Suzanne de Brunoff wrote a wonderful book called Marks on Money that they reference, and I recommend to everyone, especially if you've read Capital or are planning to read Capital. Suzanne de Brunoff is like a phenomenal like side intro, but also expanded. It's fantastic. Marcus says, I already think of money as water, literally, thanks to Jordan Maxwell wordplay, imagining rich as wider banks for liquid to flow and follow the current. It almost. This is one of the reasons I get really pissy about the flow versus flux comment, because when we talk about the flows of the economy, we talk about the flows of capital, people do think, and it makes sense, it's a river flow, but don't think of a wider river. Think of a, because they don't even give a fuck about the river. The river doesn't matter. Size of the river, none of that. That's not even a thing they give a shit about. The question is the coefficient of the river, the derivative of the river, the differential that's happening. What is the rate of change? Because stable, wider river is not good for rich people. That's not a happy thing for an investment banker. No investment banker just wants to make steadily more of the same money. That's not how they talk about it. They don't, as long as I make my 500 grand a year, 5 million a year, I'm a happy guy. No one. That's not a single person in investment banking. If they don't have 5% growth, or they aren't beating the S&P percentage-wise on a monthly basis, or if their quants aren't doing so, like, it's a completely different way to consider it. It's not to think about, they have a wider bank, therefore more capability. It's that they have a rate of change that they're able to work with and play with, while we're only dealing with the waters, the volume of water itself. They're dealing with the rate of change. There's a great donut shop in town. I'm outside of Portland. We've got a lot of really good donut shops here. There's this really amazing one this guy started. He quit finance because he was tired of it, didn't like the vibe, didn't like the people. Opened up this donut shop because he's always been baking. He's had a lot of fun with it. He makes genuinely what are some of my favorite donuts I've ever had. 100% natural ingredients, top tier stuff. And every donut's like $3 to $5. You get one once a week. Kid and I go in. It's great. Now, his business is barely breaking even. He sells out of all of his donuts every single day. And he and I had this long conversation about the challenge is that no one, and this is across the board, no one in any of these businesses makes money enough in a business, because that's not how it works. What you need to do is you need to be going, okay, I now have enough money and this is self-sustainable. I need to open another one, because it's not about having 2 income streams. It's about showing growth over time. This is the deal. Again, we're talking about that setup. So now it's growth over time. And you're able to go, okay, I opened 2, and now that's self-sustaining. I can open 3, I can open 6, I can open 20, I can open 40. This is, the capitalist system is not about having a steady stream. It's about building a steady, growing rate of change for ever growth. That setup is a very, very important distinction to make. When we talk about the difference between a capitalist and money, flow, yes, I'm not saying flow isn't a fine thing to talk about. There's a rate of currency come in, rate of income, flow of income flows, like, yeah, 100% of that stuff. But income is not actually the thing that matters. Rate of change and growth over time is actually the thing that every financial group in the world, and investor, and all these people care about, because they care about, are you able to get more money? Can we not be stagnant, as you say? That instead, can we have, like Musk, as much of a nightmare as he would be, and everyone is staring at him like, what the fuck, you just bought this, you're doing this. That what we're not seeing behind the scenes is all of the money that was loaned, but then those loans then being resold, and the repayments on those coming from other places, and how the interest rates have shifted, and then loans against those, and then insurance on those loans then being resold. If you haven't, go watch The Big Short and go look into literally derivatives in the stock market, or look at the housing bubble. This isn't just how that works. This is finance. This is capital. This is actually how capital functions, is these things. They don't really care about one stream of income. They care about the rate of change of the stream. And this is the thing capital cares about most, is rate of change. It is the setup here. It is the differential between these two elements and how they collect and how they become actualized that matters within capital. And this is, again, it's an important shift I want to keep harping on, because as we move forward, this rate of change thing, this way that the axiomatic builds into it, and the way that ultimately the axiomatic hardens desire into particular shapes, that setup is a very important difference. And so this is why we talk about capital as today, and they do it in here, and we've done it since, is finance capital versus industrial. And again, if you go back and look at Andrew Carnegie and the people prior to him, Ford and these others, who, sure, assholes, exploitative assholes in all the ways Marx wrote about, but they were particularly in the ways Marx wrote about. They didn't actually spend a lot of their time in the mid 1800s in this derivatives markets or stocks in the way that we understand them. Not really what it was done for or how it was done. Instead, it was about how many factories can you have and how much excess can you be constantly producing for yourself to reinvest and have power and control. That thing sure still happens, but now it's a very different way that it happens. And this finance capital system is a very different way to wrap your head around it. It's important because when we get to consumption, when we get to the consumer, when we get to the consummation of all of this flux that comes together, and how the rate of change works, we're going to be relating that production to you, to not just you, to your desiring machines, to your internal setups, to the way the axiomatic works within desiring production, and how these things play together. Because we're finally going to get to Oedipus in just a few pages. Literally, the chapter is called Oedipus at Last. Which I know JK has been dying for, but we'll get there very, very soon. And when we do, it's important to be understanding this isn't just about the consistency of flows or the flow of capital, the flow of this, about the flux, rates of change, derivatives, and differentials, and how they interact. Because capital is very, very different as how it handles them. But with that, I'm going to, it's almost getting closer to 3 hours. This has been lovely. Thanks everyone, but on YouTube, Gab, thank you very much for gifting it just a metric ton of people, memberships. Wild. That's a weird feeling. But thank you. Be watching. I'm going to be doing a stream a little bit later, and we're going to relax a little bit. I'm going to be doing axiomatic streams this week, as well as self-react to my own video, which is I don't know. I decided it wasn't egotistical because my goal is to critique myself. I had a lot of comments and people writing me going, hey, so what does this mean inside of the Groupuscules essay? Because it's guattari. This isn't like straightforward stuff. So I'm going to be doing like a sort of self-react and description scream, sort of talking through all the things he's saying and where it comes from, what else he's writing, and how it goes. It'll be fun. Maybe a gaming stream later this week. We'll get that going. Thank all of you guys for joining. As always, love all of you, and it's genuinely everyone's input is fantastic. Really great. Really fucking thank all of you.